Hi, this is Sara Marks, the author of the 21st Century Austen series. Welcome to the audio commentary and annotations for my first book in the series, Modern Persuasion. This is an experiment. A lot of people ask me questions, leave interesting details in book reviews that I try never to read but always end up reading. But they ask questions about the book and the decisions I made, my inspiration, as well as decision-making changes. I thought I would put together this audio commentary that you can listen on YouTube to understand more about how this book developed. Print versions of this might be included in special editions of the book, but will be downloadable for my newsletter subscribers. And there's links in the comments below for you to, or in the description below, for you to get to that newsletter and also get a bonus story about Modern Persuasion. Let's go. Before we get into the details of the chapters, let me set the scene for how this book came to be. I was sitting on a train from Boston to New York City when the first ideas for Modern Persuasion came to me. It was May, and I was on my way to Book Expo, which would become PubCon in the book. This was the publishing industry's annual conference, and I went as a librarian. I had been going for nearly a decade, and this was my favorite conference of the year. During the pandemic, they shut it down. It no longer gets run, but people in the publishing industry and in the book world remember it fondly. Just a month before, I had written the first draft of what would become Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging. This was the first novel I had written in years that wasn't part of the Enduring series. I enjoyed writing a modernization of Jane Austen's most well-known book, and it made me want to take on Persuasion, which was my favorite of her books. I felt like it was the easiest to modernize since it was about second chances at love and how easily we can be persuaded to do something we don't want to do. You may argue with me that people can't be persuaded to give up on love, but I assure you it happens all the time. Each time a parent tries to convince a teenager that their partner is problematic, you're seeing it happen. Friends argue to give up romantic partners. Mentors and people we trust do the same. We want to trust the people we care for, and sometimes they win. I played with the idea as I rode the train. I wanted to frame it around Book Expo while centering it on the writers and the publishers. I knew enough about the publishing industry that I thought I could make this work. I wasn't quite sure about Frederick at that time, but when I got off the train in Manhattan, I knew who Emma was. This year at Book Expo was some excitement. Some big things were going on. First, two authors were there that I was really interested in hearing from. Neil Patrick Harris and Jason Segel were done with How I Met Your Mother and both promoting new book projects. Neil Patrick Harris was doing a memoir in the style of a choose-your-own-adventure book, which was delightful. And Jason Segel had co-written a middle-grade boys fantasy book. I had been a huge fan of How I Met Your Mother and was excited to see the books they were each promoting, and I had tickets to a panel for both men. I had been attending Book Expo for a decade at that point. It was a professional conference for the industry, and as a librarian, I often struggled on attending sessions and learning. But honestly, most of us weren't there for anything other than the large exhibit floor. When I started attending in 2005, the exhibit floor was 2 stories of the Javits Center, which was as large as a city block. By the end of that year, 2014, it was down to just 1 floor. There were booths where the publishers handed out their advanced ARC reader copies of their books. There were various stages where authors would speak about their books. There was a large autographing area where we would stand in line just to get a quick autograph. And publishers had autographing stations at their booths. Sometimes, especially for the larger ones, it created a little chaos that was a mixture of excitement and annoyance. I usually went home with my weight and free books, and I would ship the box of books to avoid having to navigate New York City with a 200 bag of books, as well as my luggage. Some memorable years include a Neil Gaiman autograph on the Graveyard Book, meeting Gregory Maguire when I had fallen in love with Wicked, and coming home with my weight and just knitting books alone, because I had been at the right place at the right time when the publisher was shutting down their booth and getting rid of all their display copies. Book Expo wasn't the only conference I was attending that year in New York City. I was going to be missing the end of the conference to attend a Wikipedia conference that I was speaking at. I had recently completed my thesis for a second master's degree, which was why I was now free to write more fiction, and I was presenting the research at the conference. It was just at the other end of the city, so I stayed a little longer. But I was going to miss one part of Book Expo, and that was the day they were finally opening to the public for the first time. The vibe was very different that year. There was a bit of anxiety about allowing the public to attend, like this was some sort of Comic-Con, and I expect the organizers didn't help make the difference clear to the vendors and the public. My friends attending the conference at the Book Expo would eventually tell me some of the stories about how they hadn't been able to get copies of the books they wanted because the public had to get copies of books. A number of publishers tried to sell books to conference attendees when they had not before. But most importantly, the vendors did not shut down their booths when the professionals were leaving, and thus all those extra copies of, say, your weight and knitting books weren't just given away. But I wasn't there that day to worry about it. I just heard the reports later. Back to the beginning of the conference. Once I checked into my hotel room, I started making notes about this book. I literally sat down at the desk, opened up a binder, and started writing down. I hit on the right idea, and I really just needed to get to work as quickly as I could. This is typically how my brain works. When I put it to paper, it's like it exits my brain. But until then, I'm going to be obsessed with it, playing it over and over and over until I have picked it apart and rewritten it 30 times. When someone says you can't edit a blank sheet of paper, they haven't been in my brain. And the Enduring series got a lot of that, because by this point I was working when I had an idea. I created a plan that night as well. This book was going to be the one I wrote that July for Camp NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. This is a bonus experience that some participants take part of. This is an April and July event. In April, I had written Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging, and now I was ready for the July. I knew Book Expo was the perfect setting for this, and our hero needed to be a mix of my sense of who Neil Patrick Harris and Jason Segel might be, but also the man I wanted him to be, and the man Frederick Wentworth was in the original. The more I ended up walking around Book Expo and thought about the book, the more I knew Frederick would probably be more like Jason than Neil. So I spent my 2 days at Book Expo, and then I went to the Wikipedia conference. And by the end of the third day, the day I presented at the Wikipedia conference, between the two conferences, I had enough to know what I was going to write when I started this book. The reports from friends about the chaos that had come by including the public were really not that bad. Mostly people were annoyed. It was never as bad as what happens in my book. But a friend commented that she was worried someone would get hurt, and that's when the idea for Christie's accident bloomed in my mind. But I'll stop there. Let's take this chapter by chapter. And I'll probably repeat some of these details. All right, chapter 1. Let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, I changed her name. I don't love the name Anne. I'll be honest, I also had another book, Help Wanted New Devil, and Anne was a major character in that book. I don't like to reuse names. But Emma Shaw popped into my head one day, and that character formed around her. I thought of this book and Emma, and she was the front and the center of it. So, from there, I named the other characters as it made sense. Christy, Pat, and Victor, for example, were named for friends. Pat and Victor, couple in the book, also a couple in real life. Others were pulled from the book or made up as I needed, like Seth. Really doesn't have a perfect counterpart, but he still has a counterpart. I don't have a problem with changes in character names, but clearly not everyone agrees because it routinely gets mentioned in reviews. I always question the start of the book with Emma and her family, and I went back and forth. In the original, we're really focused on who Anne Elliot is and why she is in the position she's in and why she never married and what her family was like. It really is about her family as much more than it is about her romance. I understood why it's in the original because Austen, she was writing women's fiction, not really romance. She was telling Anne's story, and Anne's story is rooted in her family's snobbery. I wanted to make readers understand how Emma is focused on what's in front of her because she's carrying the emotional load for 3 people who should be taking care of themselves. She doesn't have time to think of her needs. Even Mary forces Emma to carry part of her emotional load because no one else is, and Mary carries it for her family. And I think this is true for the original as well. Anne Elliot carries her family's emotional load, but who does she turn to for support? That's the person she puts all of her trust in, Lady Russell. This chapter also gives readers a chance to see and experience Emma's world before the introduction of Frederick. He may be on her mind, but this is her world, and she knows how to function in it. Chapter 2. I didn't want to focus too much on Emma and Frederick's first relationship. I knew they both needed something to break the ice and help them bond, but I know Frederick wasn't the guy who would take advantage of a drunk Emma. He's a good guy. He's your dream boyfriend. He's your book boyfriend. The nice thing about the fantasy of a romance story is that the men can be the best versions of themselves. We need to be slightly angry at Emma for giving him up. We need to also see that she's persuaded that it's the best of some not so great options. When I started talking to people about the story, many insisted that modern women wouldn't be able to be convinced to give up on a relationship. That's not how it works anymore. Even now, readers still insist on it. They think Emma could have had both. They forget that this wasn't about 2 people living in the same place. One wanted life on the East Coast where her industry and family were. He wanted life on the opposite coast where his industry and family were. Both would have given up everything they knew and wanted to be with the other. It was not the wrong decision to break up. What I wanted to focus on with this chapter was how easily we can be persuaded by others, especially those who know us and our values. Karen knows what to say and do to get her to see from Karen's point of view. So parents and parental figures we trust, and we want them to approve of our decisions because it's a safe and familiar feeling. And Karen is the parent, not her father. This allowed me to set up the trust that Emma has in Karen. Is Karen our villain? I think from a certain point of view, yes. But that's not how Emma sees it. She feels the decision was hers, even at the end, which we'll get to. I felt like, in the original, Anne feels the same way about Lady Russell. Anne, or Emma, made the choice regardless of the intentions of those who influenced her. Also, since Frederick was heavily inspired by Jason Segel, I leaned into some of Jason's career accomplishments, but I didn't want to make Frederick an actor. I wanted him to have some big moments that would put him in the public eye. And I wanted to highlight that he was dealing with coping mechanisms that may or may not be very healthy. At this point, we're just getting the he wrote a movie about her kind of thing. Chapter 3. In the original Persuasion, the time Anne spends with Mary's in-laws is about a third of the book. I wanted PubCon, my version of Book Expo, to have the same purpose. This is Emma in her element. She's comfortable here. She knows what to expect. She knows the people. She isn't thinking about possible surprises because she knows what's going to happen for her at this conference. She should have known Frederick would be there. Karen, at the very least, knew he would and kept it from Emma. It should be the first hints for the reader that Karen isn't as well-intentioned as Emma might want to think she is. Karen wants Emma to be like her, but the ambition isn't something Emma shares. This is also the first time we see Emma's career might be in trouble. Again, hopefully the reader connects this to Karen as they read more. Mary sees something is happening, but doesn't understand the world of publishing enough to know the pattern that she's seeing. Chapter 4. This chapter features the big moment when Emma and Frederick finally see each other again after 8 years. And I'm going to be honest, this chapter chokes me up every single frickin' time. This is one of the chapters that will overwhelm people emotionally. And I love this, and I love this couple, and I love that they can have this moment. It was such an easy book for me to write because I love them so much. But this moment is fraught with repressed emotions. On one hand, you have Emma, who is trying to process the political situation she is just discovering she's in at work and what's happening around her. She's been given a little more information from someone she trusts, but is outside the circle. She's not expecting to have to confront the repressed grief and sadness she feels for the end of the relationship she had with Frederick. But there's also the impact of her mother and the loss of her mother on the world they live in. The Shaws are not a family who manage emotion well. Mary, maybe, but she has a greater need emotionally than the others. And I never really explored Mary in depth, but she is a good character considered. Anyway, Emma's overwhelmed and ignored emotions that are now breaking through, and there's only one way for them to be expressed, and that is through tears. As someone who struggles to emote, tears are often the only way I let them out. One reader commented that Emma always seems like she's on the verge of tears, and that's why. She won't let her emotions out. So, regardless of how she feels, anytime she's excessively happy, sad, or anger, there's going to be tears. And she's still trying to control these emotions and hold them back. She can't process them because she doesn't know how. There are still too many things on her plate for her to feel safe giving in to these emotions. Chapter 5. I remember the book expo when Jason Segel came to promote his first book. It was in no way as bad as Frederick's was, I assure you. But his publisher decided to have him sign autographs of a book excerpt at the table. It was a little stapled together version of his book. It was very cute. I grabbed a copy, but I decided not to wait in line for an autograph. One, it was not the book, and I wanted the book. Two, I have fantasies about actors, and they're not the real version of an actor. They're my fantasy, and I don't want to ruin that because people aren't wonderful. No one's ever going to live up to my fantasy version of them. Nobody is going to live up to my fantasy version of them. And I didn't want to come off as a fangirl. But I did walk through to see what the vibe was because I was already turning these ideas over in my head to see how I would plot this if this was part of the book. So here's the visual. It's packed to the point that the traffic flow around the area is a mess. His publisher took over 2 aisles so that they would have a wider booth footprint. It allowed them to position the autograph table in the center of the booth. The imprints, the often genre or theme specific, had smaller tables around this big autographing area. There would be chairs and a table where people could sit and talk. When I walked by, I noticed the booths were so busy that people were sort of crammed into those meeting spaces of the imprints. The people there were there to meet the author. They were librarians, they were agents, they were other authors. They couldn't get through the chaos to meet with people. And I knew that had to be part of the story. This chaos going on around a celebrity author. And this wasn't limited to Jason Segel. The same thing happened when I got to meet Rainbow Rowell or Neil Gaiman or Gregory Maguire or other celebrity authors who were celebrities more than authors. There would always be this chaotic mess that disrupted the rest of the flow. And I knew it needed to be part of the story in a couple ways. I also wanted to communicate the level of comfort Emma and Frederick had with each other and how easy it was for both of them to return to it. This is why their breakup is so tragic for both of them. They were partners who supported each other, and that's not easy to find. Chapter 6. The first time Emma and Frederick have to spend time together is all about her anxiety. The things that can't be said because none of the people know who Frederick is palpable. They don't know who he is to her. A reader once asked me why Emma didn't tell her family about him. And there's a few reasons. One, her father and Karen, they do know. They were at graduation. Father, Walter, disapproved. Karen persuaded her to end the relationship. Emma doesn't trust many people. Karen is the one who she trusts and already knows about Frederick. And her father knows, but why not her sisters? I think Elizabeth's easy to explain. There is no way Emma is going to trust Elizabeth. There's no trust or affection there. Mary, on the other hand, is more an oversight on Emma's part rather than a refusal. When Emma comes home after graduation, Mary is off at college herself. Their current relationship is the work they've done as adults. So Frederick's not been a part of their relationship after the breakup. Thus, Mary doesn't know. Also, Emma's repressed her feelings about Frederick. Sharing him with Mary would only bring up those emotions, and that's the last thing Emma wants. Chapter 7. Two big things happen in this chapter. One is off-page, Christie's accident. I hummed and hawed about adding it in, but Emma isn't there, and it's her point of view. The second is the meeting where Emma's not given a choice to go on Frederick's tour. I needed there to be panic that would force executives to force Emma on the book tour. It was the least desirable outcome, but one they felt they had to do. It is important for readers to know, and thus you, this is not something that typically happens on book tours. If the author has a publicist, they may go on the book tour with them, but most authors go alone. The publisher often just tells the author where to show up and sends some books to the bookstore or venue. Something is wrong for Emma to be forced, and we already know Emma's not paying much attention to the politics of her job. She's clearly getting closer to burnout without realizing it as well. Did something like this ever happen at Expo? No. Though I have seen a mature adult mentor of mine run like a teenage fangirl to get Harry Potter Book 7's tote bag before the book came out. Run, joy in her heart at the choice to go get this bag. It was glorious, and I felt proud to be the one to have told her that it was time to go get the tote bag. Also, it was a crappy tote bag. It fell apart before I even got home. I was so upset. I love tote bags. Everybody knows this. I was destroyed. I tried to take it to the beach. It didn't hold up. Chapter 8. We finally get to meet Patrick. I don't always name characters for people in my life, but when I do, I make it count. Christy and Patrick were named for two of my closest friends, and I've dedicated other books to them, but in this book, I wanted them to be there. And I've done this again. Amelia in Love and War in Woodhouse Hall was actually named for my best friend Emily, but I felt Emily was too close to Emma. And Adam was named for her husband. So this is, and Katie and Love from Northanger Park's Katie was named for my sister. So I will name you, I will put you in a book and name a character after you. Well, Chrissy is nothing like her book counterpart. She is a delight. She is bubbly and fun and just pure raw fun. Patrick has hints of the man who inspired him. Even his husband was named for Victor, Patrick's husband. So who is Patrick modernizing? In some ways, he's a blend of the Wentworth friends, but they meet in Lyme. Emma may have kept Frederick a secret from her friends, colleagues, and family, but he hasn't done the same. He's told all of them about her. Many even know she's the inspiration in his movie. This is different from the original. There's really no hint that Wentworth told anyone about Anne in the original, though modernizations have twisted that to make it clear that some people do know. While the detail in this book, it's different in this book, but their support systems aren't very different. And this chapter highlights a bit of that. Emma is independent, but her bubble has some friends in it, but not many. It's primarily her colleagues and her families. Meanwhile, Frederick has an extensive support system of friends and family. We get to meet them as the tour continues, but Patrick really sets the stage. And I think for Emma, Patrick's awareness of her needs is refreshing. No one carries her emotional load. No one makes her life easier. Nobody else seems to be thinking of how difficult any of this might be for her. At least nobody with the power to lift some of that burden. Patrick is doing that for both Frederick and Emma. What Emma learns by the end of this chapter is that Frederick somehow manages to take care of her without her realizing it. For me, Frederick is clearly a man who shares the emotional load with his partner. This is something that I want all my leading men to be like, because for me, it is not about them being honest and accurate men. It's about me showing women the way I think men should behave. This is what I wanted in a partner, and probably why I've not found it. It's not something men at my age are very good at doing. Chapter 9. While I don't write sex scenes in this series, my characters are modern women who enjoy sexual relationships. When I wrote this book, I was worried I couldn't write a realistic sex scene, so I decided not to. But I have written other books since then with sex scenes. It turns out I'm not terrible. But by this point, I figured the series is already low heat. Let's just keep it and acknowledge that there is a sexual relationship going on. Also, we get another one of Frederick's wonderful virtues. He never takes advantage of Emma's intoxication to get what he wants. He just waits till the next morning when she's sober and perfectly capable of reiterating, "No, I still want this." Chapter 10. The tour begins. Of course, it starts in Manhattan because they're already there. I wanted Emma to be defensive and anxious. In the original, Wentworth talks about strength of character as something he wants in a wife. I know this had to be the same vibe for this book. He's angry with her, but he doesn't see the whole picture. Or the whole Emma. He knows a version of her that flourished away from her family, that didn't have an emotional load. Now he's angry that the woman he thought he knew was more complicated than he expected. What the reader will discover later is that even though Frederick is primarily thinking of Emma when he makes his comment, this isn't the only relationship he's angry about. I never got into what happened with him and Abby, even in other stories about Frederick, and there are a few that you still haven't read. But it's reasonable to think it was also an issue with strength of character for him. This is what Patrick makes clear. He's here to help Emma because of this. Emma has to recognize that as much as she didn't share all the details with Frederick, that she didn't share all the details of herself with Frederick when they were together, she didn't see all of him either. They clearly lived in a bubble that burst when graduation came. She never thought about what they would do after graduation at all. It was a looming blob that she would have eventually had to deal with and just put aside till it was time. And then it popped in their face. Chapter 11. The party at the New York Public Library was something I've always wanted to write. And it really wasn't about the New York Public Library. A few years before writing this book, I went to a family wedding that was at the Boston Public Library. This is a large public library, probably the first in the nation, but they allow you to rent out their space for events. The family did not do it because this was a library and they love libraries. They did it because it was a gorgeous space and it was affordable for them. But it was the best wedding I've ever been to. But also I'm a librarian, so I'm exceptionally biased. I would go to any wedding in a library. I would love to host weddings in libraries. The idea of a wedding in the library just sounds like the best wedding ever. Anyway, Emma's fixing Frederick Try was another scene that had been in my head since I came up with the idea for this book. There's an intimacy to the moment that is so intoxicating. It's that slow burn. I also wanted to introduce Abby at some point. I wanted Emma to be confronted with how Frederick's life went on and why he might be angry. She needs to see his world clearly as they start on this tour. Chapter 12. While I wanted to write something about every city they stopped in on this tour, I realized it would be boring. What we really needed to do was get to LA. We've seen Emma's world, so we needed to see Frederick's world. We also needed a sense that there was something better for Emma if she would only open herself up to it. Yet, I had to make her miserable at the same time, which hurt. A quick dinner with Patrick was a good solution since he knows enough to help her, but I also wanted her emotions to be getting to their peak. But it gives them a time to talk. Chapter 13. We're in LA. All right, before we get to the heart of what happens in the city, I decided to give Frederick and Emma another scene together. I wanted her to see the people she would have been surrounded with if she came... Patrick and Emma, not Frederick and Emma. Another scene alone together. I wanted her to see who would have surrounded her if she had stayed with Frederick. I know she would have had some friends, something she doesn't think much about, but it does sit there for the reader to understand. It's a big deal that she would have friends if she moved to LA. She doesn't have friends in New York. It also gives her a moment to relax, to not have to be on, which she's had to be this entire time. Chapter 14. We start moving to the people in Frederick's circle and meeting them. Sammy was especially important since she played the character Emma inspired. These two women couldn't be more different, and Frederick turns to relationships with women who don't remind him of Emma. And she realizes that as she spends time with these people. It gets her to start acknowledging her own regret. For me, regret is a complicated emotion. It's easy to look back at choices and regret them. We often forget that the person we are now is born from the choices we made. We want a second chance to get the do-over. We want a second chance that might result in us losing all the amazing things that have happened and shaped us. Yes, something sucked. But who knows what would be different if another choice had been made. You could be more miserable than you are right here and now. It could be terrible. For me, there's no regret with past mistakes. I know the things I've accomplished are because of those mistakes, and it's not worth losing the accomplishment to get a second chance. To even imagine a second chance. That's part of why I like a second chance romance stories. It's not about going back to the past and getting that second chance. It's about letting the person you are now inform what might be different this time. Emma doesn't regret breaking up with Frederick because it was the natural outcome of what was happening. She'll spend the rest of the book trying to figure out what it actually is that she's regretting. But that's not the regret. Also, yes, Frederick has problematic coping mechanisms. He's not perfect. He's human, and we don't make the best choices. We are not wonderful all the time. Chapter 15. All right, back to Emma's career situation. I've been lucky to find a career I'm passionate about, but sometimes it's not easy. I often work for people who are horrible bosses. Sometimes I'm the problem. Sometimes my colleagues or the pay are the problem. Sometimes the entire situation can't be fixed. But it's easy to get paralyzed, especially when you think you have a plan but feel trapped. Emma's like that. She feels trapped in her current position because of the burden she's carrying on her shoulders. She's expected to take over her family's imprint someday, but she's being held back by someone looking to keep her own job. She has a family that someone needs to take care of, and nobody else is stepping up. Now she's thinking of her regret, and it's opening her eyes to what else is out there. Plus, she's aware there is something going on at work that she's not seeing all of. She's getting through the fog of her burnout, or at least her looming burnout. This chapter presents her with the first chance to put all of these threads together to see the pattern and to make a decision. Chapter 16. It's time to swap Patrick for Seth. Seth was one of those characters who came to me in the moment. I knew I needed a true love for Louisa, so Frederick would be free to be with Emma. As a gardener of characters, I plant the seeds and I let them grow where they will. This is something George R.R. Martin does, for example. Every so often, an unexpected character pops up and surprises me, and in this book, that was Seth. He didn't get much time on the page, but he needed to be included, and I'm still not sure why yet, other than we need a true love for her. No, he has a purpose. I just, even all these years later, haven't figured it out yet. Patrick, now that he knows Emma, not just through the filter of Frederick, sees the solution clearer than either of our two main characters. He understands that nothing will change as long as he stands between them. He, Patrick, stands between them, playing intermediary. He wants his best friend to be happy, and he likes Emma enough to want the same for her. So he decides to step back and let the bomb blow up, because nothing's going to move forward until it does. Chapter 17. This chapter brings us to the final stop for Emma on the book tour, and it's the build-up to the end of Act 2. We're in Chicago, the city where Frederick and Emma first fell in love. If the bomb's going to blow up, it's going to happen here. This is the only place it can happen. I considered adding more about their past here, but I knew it wasn't necessary. This isn't about their past. This is about their future. You, as the reader, have enough to understand what they meant to each other and what went wrong. Now we need to get them back together. But first, let's have some meltdowns. Lots of meltdowns. I spent a lot of time debating if Frederick should kiss Emma in the meltdown scene, and I decided to piss you off instead. Also, this chapter is when my father learned the word clusterfuck, a word I still find delightful, and there are stickers about just clusterfuck in my sticker store. The cup of tea was something from My Fair Lady. It's my favorite scene in My Fair Lady, and as I was thinking of Emma during the character development, which was essentially the train ride from Boston to New York City, I knew she was going to chant that when she made tea. I knew it was going to be something that comforted Frederick and was a curiosity for the others, and I was going to put it in earlier, but I saved it for this point because, as oblivious as Louisa may seem, she's not an idiot. She's been with them for this entire tour and can tell there's tension between them. She just doesn't understand anything. Chapter 18. Louisa's accident is something from the original. It was a critical scene for both Emma and Frederick, as critical of her as he's been the entire book, Frederick and Emma, from her point of view at least. Frederick sees who Emma really is. Say what you want about it being strength of character issues, but I think over time we change. The world impacts us. I often think of the idea of the hill I want to die on, the fight worth fighting for. What's the hill I want to die on? Because you can't die on all of them. And as you get older, you learn to pick your hills. You learn to pick your battles. Both Emma and Frederick destroyed their relationship. Both needed to change if they were going to have a chance. He needs to love her for who she is, not who he wants her to be or who she used to be. This scene allows him to see that. Even though he got a version of her, she was always herself, and that's who he loved. She will be the level-headed woman who can help in an emergency. She's organized, kind, thoughtful. The previous day had been about butting heads and having meltdowns. Now he regrets being the asshole. Chapter 19. We move into Act 3 and we revisit the pro and con list of life with Frederick. Now everything has been flipped and Emma has to make choices about her life. She has to decide if she can live without him, but always see him. First, we get some family time on Cape Cod. I always knew I was going to set this on the Cape and not in the Hamptons. It could have easily been set on the Hamptons, but I know Cape Cod better. There's a very different vibe to Cape Cod when compared to the Hamptons, and it's really kind of hard to explain unless you've experienced both places. But I sort of sum it up this way. Cape Cod's really about families, and the Hamptons really feels like it's about the party. But the Hamptons are beautiful. I will never say don't go to Long Island. It's so much fun. Also, we get to meet Penny, and I promise Penny's story is coming. She is our main character for Citation Needed, or whatever the title becomes. She also has a second chance at love, but she's going to be our Wentworth. Chapter 20. This is short, but I wanted to make it clear that I wanted to make it clear to Emma that Frederick is completely free. Also, he's here. Now he'll see her in her real world and why she turned into a shell of herself. Also, turns out Elizabeth is the worst. We didn't expect that. She's the worst. Chapter 21. There are a few things going on in this chapter. First, we meet Dave, who's not a bad guy, but is in a really crappy situation and is also an entitled dipshit. I've considered a redemption story for him, but he's not that important. Jorge is important. What's important here is seeing the dynamics of these families. For Frederick, the outsider, to see the family she gave him up for and why she is the way she is. I want to address something that becomes clearer later. Elizabeth's bullying of Emma. If there is a bully in this family, it's Elizabeth. Mary might be needy and whiny, but she's very protective of Emma. She knows that Emma holds this family together, but she carries a lot of the emotional load for herself. Elizabeth just wants to poke and poke at Emma until she gets the drama she wants. She certainly does get it this time. Emma's already pushed to her breaking point emotionally. She's more aware of how she's being used by her family and what it costs her. She's ready to make a change, and we know that from past scenes. When drunk, she's direct and honest with people. There have already been cracks in the surface, but this is the first fracture to her world. Also, to be fair to Dave, he knows nothing about anything. He just likes Emma and thinks he's helping. I mean, he does want to date her, but he doesn't know anything. He's just there, being an idiot. You know, low-key idiot. Chapter 22. Now it's time for Frederick to question the situation he's entered and wonder if he's got a chance. He's here for Emma. He's here to win her back. The problem is that we're in Emma's head, and she's trying to manage too much to realize he's trying to talk to her. He'll figure that out, don't worry. But I needed more time for him to misinterpret. So when you finally get to read his point of view, you know what's going on and why he's getting increasingly frustrated. Chapter 23. There's a lot happening in this chapter that, again, is more to do some of the lifting for the next chapter. What's really important is that Emma's unacknowledged grief and the rest of her family's similar problem has been impacting her relationships. Frederick, as we know, is having his half agony, half hope moment. Chapter 24. The letter in the original Persuasion is one of the most powerful scenes I have ever read emotionally. It always makes me tear up. It's the moment I'm waiting for in every retelling of Persuasion. There's something about standing on the precipice of getting what they both want, but one wrong chance can ruin it all. It's just the emotional peak. This is a long chapter, though, because we're rereading most of the entire book, but now from Frederick's point of view. You get to learn what he was thinking and feeling. You read as his anger fades while he struggles to realize he never stopped loving her. There's a few duplicated scenes in this chapter. Originally, I tried to vary them a little because he sees things differently and might remember details she didn't, but it really didn't work out that way. The longer he writes, though, the less linear his chapter becomes, because he spent the entire tour polishing the first part as he obsesses over seeing her again and how she's changed. But by the end, we're getting snippets of his text message because he's in this moment. He's ready to tell her he loves her and doesn't need to edit the story. It's only for her at this point, and he's getting desperate. Chapter 25. In the 2007 adaptation of Persuasion, the scene after Anne reads the letter is exceptionally powerful and also polarizing. Your purists don't like it that they kiss, but I love that moment. There's a frenzy to Anne's search for Wentworth that perfectly sets up that kiss. That kiss is catharsis. And as I considered how to mirror that moment in this book, I knew I needed Emma to be ready to act. She knows she loves him. She knows there's a life for her in his world. She knows he still loves her. These misses, as she hunts for him, could easily have been avoided if they just check their phones, honestly. She finds him, though, when she stops looking for him. Honestly, people just need to communicate. That is the lesson here. Chapter 26. We now understand that what Emma has realized about her regret. Remember, I mentioned how many readers felt people don't have to choose between love and their careers, and I disagreed. Sometimes people have to make a choice. You can't have it all. Emma doesn't regret refusing the life Frederick offered at 22. She regrets cutting him out of her life. That's the mistake they made. Who knows what would have happened if they had kept in touch, if they had simply texted or called or emailed each other. She, at the very least, would have had someone who cared enough to keep her from drowning in her obligations. We also get some information that is shared in Frederick's side of the story. So there's a prequel story called Frederick Hits Send. It's about the decision he makes to publish this book that he has published, that has caused him to go on this book tour. It is a free bonus story, and if you look in the comments below and you sign up for my newsletter, you can get it. Thumbs up. Do that. This story tells you what led up to his publishing the book, things that Emma wouldn't know, and Emma is now told those details. So sign up for the newsletter, get to read something from Frederick's point of view. Also, there is another bonus story that will come eventually that is basically Frederick's worst date ever, and it happens after he breaks up with Abby and before he decides to publish the book, and it is him at his lowest, and I loved writing it. He's a cinnamon roll. Epilogue. All right, we're at the end. I debated adding just an extra chapter to wrap up the threads, but I knew the Emma and Frederick's story was over. What I really needed to do was jump ahead and reflect on two main confrontations. First, Walter, Emma's father. He gets the other happy ending in this book. It's as if he woke up during some of this and started moving forward. Was Emma's role as caretaker hurting him? No, but I think it allowed him to check out. And it was her meltdown that really let him see how he was hurting his daughters, especially his two younger ones. The other was Karen. She was a much bigger deal to resolve because her decision making was why this story got to take place. Emma needed to face her and call her out, but Emma is much too kind to really hurt Karen's feelings. Karen is that feminist, the second wave feminist who will simultaneously tear you down while also tearing you down. They want you to achieve for feminism, but they also feel like there's a scarcity and you can't take it from them. So Karen only hears Emma blaming her for what happened. And it's no wonder Karen's career is floundering. And there is a bonus story connected to Love from Northanger Park's Katie called 150 Pounds Lifted that is about Karen as a mentor, which isn't any good. Anyway, that's it for this book on annotation and commentary. I hope you enjoyed hearing more about what I was thinking when it came to do more. If you want me to do more like this for the other books, I am more than happy to give it a try. Let me know. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts on some things, what you read as you read these chapters. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. The channel channel is filled with videos of me working. I do story time. I do audiobooks. I am going to do more of these. Hit the bell to be notified when other videos get uploaded and released. That way you will see them. YouTube doesn't always do it immediately, but they do send a notification someday. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed hearing more about Modern Persuasion.